She fought in the Civil War. Disguised as a man, Sarah Edmonds is one of those figures whose story you almost can't believe. If you think about it, we tend to remember certain things from the Civil War, and obviously Lincoln and also George McClellan come to mind immediately. When we think about women during the Civil War, we usually think about the nurses, for example, Clara Barton and all that stuff. And we do recall Harriet Tubman, but there were other people who did very unique things, like Sarah Edmonds. Who was Sarah Edmonds? Well, she was born into slavery and she escaped. She disguised herself as a man and fought in the Union Army. She was the daughter of a black father and a white mother, which made her 3/4 white. And when she was younger, she had been able to pass as white. And so when she was 16 years old, she left New Orleans and she started to work as a domestic servant in order to buy her own freedom. But she had always wanted more than domestic servitude. She really wanted more for her life. And then came the Civil War. This really changed everything. Her owner was actually a member of the Confederacy, and he went off to fight for the Confederacy. She says, "I have no desire to be a slave, especially under the Confederacy." In 1861, she fled to New Orleans, and she lived with her brother Peter. He was working as a barber there. Now, this is something to keep in mind about Sarah. When she was younger, she had used the name James Baker, so this is not the first time that she had disguised herself as a man. She had done this before, and she will use this same disguise during the Civil War. And she tells her brother Peter, "Look, I want to join the Union Army, and I need your help." Now, Peter himself was not happy about the idea of his sister disguising herself as a man and fighting for the Union Army, but he was convinced by her arguments. He could see that she really wanted to do this, and he didn't want to stand in her way. So he helped her. He cut her hair close to her head, and he dressed her up as a man. She wore a soldier uniform that belonged to Peter's friend. The two of them walked down to the recruitment office together, and she enlisted as a Union soldier that day. There are some reports that say she actually gave her age as 19, but they probably just rounded her up a bit because she looked older than that. She joined the 38th Infantry Regiment, and everybody called her Private James Baker. As far as anybody knew, she was a free black man from Ohio. She was assigned to Company H. She told her fellow soldiers that she had run away from domestic servitude in order to join the army. We don't know exactly what stories she told them, but she was convincing enough. And this was important because if they had known that she was a woman, they would have sent her home immediately. You couldn't serve in the Civil War if you were a woman. It was against the rules. She served at a number of different battles, including the Battle of Milliken's Bend, and this was an interesting experience because this was where African Americans, both former enslaved people and also those who were free, really proved themselves. The Confederates attacked Fort Wagner, South Carolina. It was July 1863. They thought they were going to take the fort easily. They really had no idea what they were in for. The Union troops defending this fort were almost exclusively made up of African American soldiers. There were only for white officers. The rest of them were African American, and they had been through a lot. They had been through the siege of Port Hudson, and they had lost many men. But the troops that showed up to relieve them were also African American. And the Confederates didn't know any of this. They expected it to be an easy victory. Instead, they were repelled. She was wounded at least twice during the war. Once she had malaria, and the other time she was shot in the shoulder. She received an honorable discharge from the Army in 1864. She received a medical discharge because of her health. And after that, she returned home to New Orleans. In 1865, she married a man named Charles Edmonds. The couple had 4 children. She worked for many years as a nurse. She worked at the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. She was now going by the name Sarah Edmonds. Nobody knew her secret. Most of her family didn't even know that she had fought in the Civil War. She was extremely private about it. In 1906, she decided finally to reveal her story to the world. She wrote an autobiography called The 20 Years Soldier. Personal experiences of a lady who for 20 years disguised herself as a man, so she revealed her story to the public. It was quite popular. And then in 1910, she was interviewed by the W.E.B. Du Bois. She became part of the Niagara movement, which later became the National Association for the Advancements of Colored People. After she died in 1916, her story became known to a wider audience. She was celebrated as a pioneer, as somebody who defied gender roles in order to fight for freedom. People started to recognize that this was a big deal. This was a black woman who had been in the army. And there's another thing that happened. Some people started to question whether or not she had really been in the army. A number of people came forward claiming that they had been in the 38th Infantry with her, but they said that she had not been a woman. Instead, she had been a spy. For the Union Army, they claimed that she had enlisted in order to get inside information on the Confederacy. And then some journalists started to repeat this. And so, over time, her reputation became more myth than reality. We know that she was in the army, right? We have documentation that shows that. But some people still claim that she wasn't a woman. She wasn't disguised as a man. Instead, she was a spy. We also know that there's one thing that the military likes to keep quiet, and that's the fact that they had women serving in the Civil War who weren't spies. So, why did this happen? Why was she forgotten? Well, you got to remember that there were thousands of women who served in the Civil War, and most of them did it in plain sight. They weren't disguised as men. They were nurses. They ran hospitals. They cooked food for soldiers. They even ran laundries. But their names aren't in the record books. And so Sarah Edmonds, her story is really emblematic of these women. She did something extraordinary, but yet she's been forgotten. Still, we can remember her today. We can recognize her story. And by doing so, we also honor all those other women who did amazing things during the Civil War. Did you know about Sarah Edmonds? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.